welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. As always, my name is Scott Barker, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Got a great conversation lined up today. We've got some meaty content, some meaty slides to go through, and I have two awesome guests specifically for this topic too. So what we're talking about is your demand generation strategies and why they have a last mile problem. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how we can actually bridge that gap and solve that problem. And we're going to touch on a multitude of different things. One being, how B2C buying experiences have kind of shifted the way that we all think, even when we have our B2B hats on. And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of the classic sales and marketing alignment and what kind of drove this explosion of the classic BDR, SDR teams, which I think was partly due to Aaron Ross's predictable revenue book, and it's kind of just permeated throughout. And so that's kind of what we're going to be discussing today. And before I introduce my awesome two guests, really quick, just housekeeping items. Number one, so all these are recorded. So even if you can't, stay for the whole thing, or you got to go and do a one-on-one or close a deal or whatever it is, make sure you do that. We will send this out to you within 24 hours. I, without fail, get at least 5 or 6 emails every time saying, hey, where's the recording? I promise it is coming. Just takes about 24 hours to kind of do its thing. And then number two is we do these webinars, for the community. These two gentlemen and myself have showed up really to answer your questions and your problems that you're having. So we've got content laid out, but I always love it when the community kind of is in the driver's seat. So there's a Q&A section at the bottom. If you want to go down right now, type, your name, your title, what organization you're with. It always makes it fun for us. And then if you have any questions sort of as we go, then please, feel free to ask them. I'll do my best to kind of weave in relevant questions throughout. And then if we have some that are maybe out of left field, we've left some time at the end as well to answer them. So without further ado, I want to introduce my two awesome guests. I've been hanging out a lot with these guys lately. I am joined by Ben Parker and Aaron Bollinger. Ben, Aaron, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. Good to see you again.
Pumped to hang out again. So these two gentlemen I met down in Austin at our road show, and then we've had a couple meetings together. We did a podcast together, a really good one. You should go check out on the Sales Engagement Podcast if you haven't. And now we've got this, and these guys are just full of knowledge. So before we kind of dive in, I always love to just give a little bit of color. And Ben, I know you're the co-founder and head of operations at Kronologic. Ben, you're also co-founder and the CRO at Kronologic. But can you give me kind of the quick and dirty background on how you guys got to where you're at today?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I think this is, we'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the kind of the first section of the content. But I've been in sales for 15 years, and as a seller, I'm always looking to get, how do I convert more leads to opportunities? How do I expand my pipeline? Because I know pipeline cures all ills. So it's a kind of thing that's been on my mind for a long time. And Ben was also in sales and business development. And so we really met here in part of the startup scene within Austin, and, had similar ideas and thoughts, and also just I recognized a great, initial product that Ben and our other co-founder Trey had built originally at VMware.
Yeah,
Very cool.
And then, like Aaron mentioned, been in sales of the sales world pretty much my entire career, sat in a B2C seat, sat in a B2B seat, and a couple of B2B seats, led a few sales teams, led a business development team, and then moved on into operations, as Aaron mentioned, at VMware, and did a number of things there that kind of gave us the idea, hey, there's a big problem out here, and we got to get out there and solve it.
Very cool. Awesome. And quick shout out to some of the people that are joining. We got Kristen Shook, NCS Outbound at Orkin Pest Control. We got Rebecca Ferry, Senior Catering Sales Exec at Sheraton, Grand Seattle. Shout out Seattle, Pacific Northwest. Sam P, Customer Account Manager. We've got Michael, SDR at Carrot. Rodrigo, the CRO at MaxCard. Daniel, CRM Admin and Marketing Manager. Matt Brown from Nexus Systems. We got a lot of people, which is amazing, and it's a wide swath of different titles, which is pretty cool. All right, let's keep it rolling as we go. Cool. So yeah, Ben, you want to just run us through the agenda, what we're going to be talking about today?
Absolutely, yeah. So I figure, the general flow we'll follow is, we branded this thing, demand gen strategies have a last mile problem. So let's start. Okay, what is the last mile problem? How did we, first discover it for ourselves? And then what did it, what behaviors did it drive for us? We'll talk about why it matters so much, right? I mean, it's not something that most businesses bring up in every QBR. There are a couple reasons for that. But there is a ton of money sitting on the table with existing spend and existing headcount. Let's talk about why that matters, right? Then we'll take you through actually some a really speed of business type calculation to just give you an idea of, okay, if I know some general numbers in my business, what reasonable expectation do I have for kind of that total addressable market in the resources that we already have deployed today? And then we'll talk about some of the ways that these companies, that we've seen a lot of different companies addressing this problem. You alluded to this earlier, Scott. Why did SDR teams explode? I mean, if you think about 15 years ago, there were only a handful of organizations with them. Now they're everywhere. And then what is the next step? What is the next generation of solutions that are trying to confront this problem?
And as part of 3 and 4, we'll help you quantify your own last mile problem, your own average value per meeting, and we'll actually give you some formulas and help you get those numbers to take back to your executive teams and your colleagues.
Awesome. And right before we dive into kind of a little bit more of the story and then go into these agendas, I want to do a really quick poll. Let's get everyone kind of involved. And the first question I want to ask is, what is your average value per meeting? Okay, what do you think it is? Not everyone will know, but if you could estimate what your average value per meeting is, this is, average sales meeting. This could be an opportunity or a discovery call. What is that? Curious to see how many people are confident in their ability to actually guess that. And then last one, what is your most valuable lead channel? So if you're a seller and you see lead source demo requests, does that get you excited? When you say lead source webinars or events, does that get you excited? Or perhaps it's cross-sell. So you see that maybe they're using a competitor on one of the sections of that you offer, and there's an opportunity there and it comes in. So super curious. This will make more sense as we go. And we kind of talk through it. But Ben, Aaron, I got to get your guesses on what do you think people are going to think their average value per meeting is? And I hope we don't skew the results by this. But.
I mean, the theme we've seen out in the wild is people underestimate this. And another way to think about it is any given meeting that somebody on your team right now is performing, what do you think that meeting is worth to the business? And then on most valuable lead channel, it's interesting. And most valuable can be debated. Whereas is the best leads I get or the most leads I get? And do you want more leads overall if you've got to weed through them, or do you just want the best leads, the bluebirds? So that's kind of a never-ending debate as well.
All right, let's close that poll up. Let's see how close we are here. All right. So we have, so 45% of people do think it's over 2,500, 27% in the 500 to 2,500 range, 23% say the 100 to 500, and then 5% are saying that under 100. And then what is your most valuable lead channel? We actually have an overwhelming majority, 41% saying other, which is interesting. I wonder what other is. If you want to chat what other is, if you hit other, that would be super interesting to know. And all right, Michael Klein saying cold calling, outbound.
Okay.
Cold emails. Okay, cool. So interesting. So I guess, so cold calling is, you would rather have a name on a list than a demo request? Is that what I'm hearing? That's a bold. You guys are awesome, then. That's wild.
It's a bold strategy.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, you don't get demo requests. That makes sense. So that would make sense why outbound is the way to go. Okay, yeah. Okay, so people don't get demo requests. Some people don't have the luxury, so they're all outbound. Cool. Well, that was super interesting. Anything surprising about those results, guys?
I'm curious to see what other is.
Yeah, I would say so. So outbounding for sure for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Definitely curious to see more what other is. One thing I will say is kudos to you, the audience, for selecting that higher value one. I mean, honestly, we've sat with a lot of sales and marketing leaders at some of the largest brands in North America, and they don't think that it's that high until we actually work through the calculation. So for you guys to just kind of know that and feel that inherently, seriously, kudos, know your business.
Yeah, love it. All right, let's move on here, gentlemen. Let's get into it.
Absolutely. So,
yeah, just real quick, Aaron Bollinger, I've sold from pre-seed, Series A, B, C, and most recently IPO, NASDAQ traded Bizarre Voice. And I've been in the sales game for a long time. I bring some of that experience to the conversation today.
Was a Division I athlete in college. I was a swimmer. So I know what it's like to be uncomfortable, and apparently I just like that for some reason. But I would say that, over the course of my life, I've been a habitual calculated risk taker. I love to tinker. I love to experiment. I love to understand the levers that drive a system. And I took that into a B2C sales seat, a B2B sales seat, into sales leadership, and then most recently operational leadership at VMware.
Very cool.
All right. So just to kind of kick things off, I want to talk about how we discovered the last mile problem, and it happened through personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, really where this started, I mean, all good sellers know it's a numbers game. They know that, the activities that I'm doing today directly impact my paychecks and my commissions in the future. But being that experimenter, being that data-driven person, I wanted to know, okay, how much? Can we quantify this? And that thought process kind of culminated with a very early experience at VMware when we were speaking with a sales leader, right before sales kickoff, and everybody was talking about what a great place it is to be, and it really was. But we're in such a great place. There's so much demand in the market. We just retired 90,000 leads last quarter. And I remember the room I was in. I remember the chair I was in. I remember the time of day, because that hit me in the face so hard. I thought, okay, I clearly have a different definition of retired in my head, right? That can't possibly mean what I think it means. Turns out it did. And it started me down this kind of process of looking to, okay, when you normalize for all the other variables, lead age, the channel, all of these other things, what are those worth in bookings to the company if you have a human being touch them just once? And it turned out to be a couple $100 per lead. And so some back of the napkin math told me that what that sales leader had actually said was, we left tens of millions of dollars on the table last quarter in the volumes and the investment that we've already made. And so I was in a role at that time that was primarily focused on making that inside sales engine significantly more efficient at how they go to market. And so I thought, hey, that might be a pretty good place to start, right? And it drove a whole number of experiments and iterations to try to narrow in, okay, we've got a BDR and an SDR team. They're having discovery calls, every day. what is each one of those discovery calls worth in bookings to the business just one sales cycle into the future? And then in a perfect world, what's our TAM, right? In this existing investment, what's that total addressable market that we already have from our existing headcount and existing marketing spend? Turned out there's a lot in that gap, and that's what we went after, and that's ultimately what drove us to start a company.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing there is, whether you've got a good inbound engine coming, or you're going outbound and you're having, creating these discovery calls or having these good conversations, then you're left, at the end of the quarter, end of the month, where there's just a massive swath of those leads that just are, like you said, just slipping through the cracks, and they're not going anywhere. And you guys basically figured out a formula to quantify the value of what was being missed, and it was shocking. Am I hearing that correctly?
It was, and actually thank you for that, because really all of that's cool, but what does it do to change behavior, right? What I actually found personally with myself and then, the teams that I was leading is once we understood that every single time you were on the phone with somebody, no matter what the outcome of that call was, just by the law of averages, every single time you were on the phone with somebody, you were retiring a few $1,000s worth of quota. That really started to change how behaviors were executed throughout the team and how people prioritize times and tasks. And it was amazing to watch.
That's super interesting. That's such an interesting kind of way to reframe it, right? Is this idea of that whether it's closing or not, every minute that you spend on the phone with a potential prospect, you're getting closer to retiring your quota. That's a super interesting way to think about it, as a seller, like, especially when you're going through the dark patches, which we all kind of do. If you know that, and you know that the law of averages is going to kind of play out eventually, hopefully, and if you're not just terrible at your job, then I think that's a really cool way to frame it, and maybe the future way of how sellers start to think in a much more, because that's actually a more data-driven approach, right? That's like, you're kind of inching along. That's
it's
really cool.
It's very obvious, especially for sales teams, if marketers aren't generating enough leads, right? It's also very obvious to everybody in the organization if sales isn't closing the opportunities that everybody knows about. But what's really easily hidden is when you have a bunch of leads and a bunch of opportunities, what that actual conversion rate is from the leads that you have to actual good qualified sales opportunities. And that little piece of the funnel is like this hidden segment today that nobody fully owns, except that we are now moving toward it because of the revenue titles and the kind of the revenue org approach, I think is what's helping us and helping executives kind of hone in on this a little bit. But it happens right there at the intersection of sales, marketing, and sales. And that's really where that last mile problem is. And just to put a point on it, Scott, the last mile problem here is the last mile is with respect to a marketing lead. It's the last mile problem of your leads.
Right. That was a really good clarification, because, I think a lot of people probably listening to this might go, oh no, like anytime an op gets disqualified, we'll do like a campaign into them, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about before it actually gets to an op, in between discovery and op, where it's kind of this still in no man's land because no one is owning it. Marketing's like, hey, we did our job. Sales is like, ooh, but it's not ready for me. So it's in this no man's land, or the last mile, so to speak. Cool.
Marketing saying, I've delivered the lead, and sales is saying, I can't close a deal until I can at least meet with the prospect.
Yeah. All right. Now what do we do about it? Why does it matter?
Yeah. So, why does this problem matter? I mean, simple answer is like, because there's money on the table, obviously, but let's take a customer first mindset. This problem matters because inherently it can create a poor buying experience and a poor customer journey, right? Our B2B or our B2C experiences have completely shifted our B2B buyers' expectations. Everyone on this webinar, Aaron, Scott, myself, we all expect that we can get 2-day shipping for free on pretty much anything. We all expect that I can summon a stranger within the next couple minutes to drive me pretty much wherever I want. We all expect that I'm going to stream that movie I missed in the theaters in 4K as soon as I get home tonight, right? Those experiences and the interactivity that we get in that immediate gratification shifts the way B2B buyers go to purchase solutions. What's really interesting about this is that even though B2B buyers experience the most ghosting, as it were, even when they have budget and they do say, hey, I'm interested, I'm scoping a project for X, Y, or Z, those B2B buyers actually have a higher expectation of the sales team engaging them in real time when they are being hand raisers. So we see something like 48% of all leads, Drift put this out last year, 48% of all leads got zero follow-up at all. And the ones that actually did get follow-up took longer than 2 days to interact with them. Now, that's interesting. A lot of us are sellers on this call. An interesting thing that I feel like is important for our audience to hear is I was a tech buyer. I had budget and evaluated and purchased different solutions. And I would educate myself a long way down the funnel. I would narrow it down to 3, 4, 5 different vendors. And then I would put out requests to contact to all of those vendors. And what's funny is somewhere between 2 to 3 of them would get back to me. And ultimately, those are the ones, because I've got to make a decision fast, my budget's gone at the end of the quarter, those are the ones that we end up doing the deal with. So it's a poor customer experience, and for the sellers, that time is fleeting. That window is not open very, very long.
Yeah. And so why do you think that problem, because that's a staggering fact, right? 48% of leads are not getting followed up on. That's crazy. Why do we think that is? Is because there's all different types of leads. People could decide that event leads are crap. We never close them. So they just stop following up and they use their time elsewhere. What are you guys seeing, or what do you think is causing, these leads not to get followed up on? Because I think myself and a lot of sellers probably on the call are like, what? Are you serious? What I would do with those leads,
I mean, to summarize from a lot of different data points, I would say that the bottleneck is time.
Right.
The Salesforce actually put out a really interesting set of data. I mean, it's a little older now, but early 2018, they put out a analysis of per lead channel, what is actually going to convert into revenue, one standard sales cycle into the future. And what was really interesting is when you normalize all those lead channels and you look at that, the likelihood of any given lead ultimately turning into revenue is actually pretty small. And what are we as sellers focused on? We are focused on revenue generating activities. And so if I look at the 100 calories that I can, 100 calories that I'm going to spend in the next hour, or whatever it is, what is the most effective way that I can retire quota, put a roof on my head, put food on the table for my family? That's going to be focusing on the activities that have the highest likelihood of ultimately producing revenue. And if you list the activities in a sales funnel out, closing a negotiated deal, moving a validated deal to negotiation, and then you go way down to the bottom and say turn any given lead into a qualified opportunity, the likelihood that that step results in a paycheck is a full order of magnitude lower than any of the sales funnel activities elsewhere. And so it's time and prioritization.
You can't blame the sellers. Like, they've got to prioritize quota. Everybody notices if you don't make quota, and when you crush your quota. They don't notice how well you actually follow up on leads. And to be clear, we're not talking about like Bluebird demo requests. We're talking about, all kinds of leads. Those leads, but also someone downloaded a white paper that tells you that they are way down the funnel into the decision stage, and they're about to choose you or your competitor. And they wouldn't download the white paper if they didn't. Ideally, you want somebody to follow up with every one of those, with every one of those people for at least specific white papers, case studies, webinars.
Yeah, absolutely. What you guys are saying reminds me of a guy I used to work with who was one of our top performers who said he wasn't in sales. He was just a professional prioritizer of time, as that's what he called. And it was true, right? If you get really good at seeing where you should spend your time, that's how you get to the top of the leaderboard, really. So that's interesting. Okay. Makes total sense. This B2C thing, I talk to this all the time, right? I often, when I'm doing like consulting or advising and people ask me questions, just be like, well, we're just 4 years behind what B2C is doing. So let's just look over there for answers. And typically you can find them. So that's super interesting. Okay, let's talk about some solutions now. How do we first quantify?
Absolutely. And this is important because lead deficit does affect everybody. Even if it's not being called out in your company today, if we're only looking at leads generated and we're only looking at business one, the lead deficit between those conversions at some point is going to come back to everybody that's on this webinar. If you're on the revenue side of the house, because you're going to run out of budget for more marketing, or you're going to run out of headcount for new sales teams. So this is really important, and we're going to give you the formulas right now for 2 metrics that are easy to calculate. Everybody here can do it. And the proof is that a lot of executives we work with actually like doing the math, which is pretty incredible to go into a sales presentation and do math and have people like it. So,
and Aaron, quickly before we go into this as well, I want to make sure we're painting the picture for everyone as well. So why, if I'm an individual contributor, how does this also affect me, and how is knowing this number going to help me?
Great question. So inevitably, you were going to have conversations about your pipeline. Do you have enough of the right quality of leads? And is that giving you what you need at the bottom of your funnel that actually comes out the other end? And these numbers are going to give you some actual quantification, some objective information that can help you back up your suspicion that I've got enough, but I've got to improve on my closing skills, or I don't have enough at the top of the pipeline. My shape is fine, but it's not big enough overall. I've got to increase the scale.
Makes total sense. Thanks for clarifying there. We do have one other question as well. Just wants some clarity around, can you please explain lead deficit? What exactly are we talking about there?
Absolutely. So actually that is the calculation we're going to talk about second.
Cool.
But it is basically how many leads for a given lead channel. Could be gated content, could be webinars, could be event follow-up. But for that channel, how many leads do you have that are true qualified leads that are not converting to qualified opportunities?
Got it. Makes total sense. So any lead that comes in that is, let's say, an MQL that never goes and gets, switched over to an opportunity, that is your lead deficit.
Correct. That number, and then you can trend that over time. You can look at it by channel, and then you can look at it in the past as lead debt, year by year, is another way of looking at it. So 2 metrics here: average value per meeting, and then lead deficit. So it starts with average value per meeting. You've got to understand how valuable the time that your sellers are engaging with customers, and also your client success and your renewal teams. All of these customer-facing teams, the time is very valuable, and a good way to have a number that you can easily circulate is average value per meeting. So average value per meeting is the mean, the statistical mean, just the average of your annualized contract value. So on average, for a given product or a given business unit, any customer is worth $10,000 a year to us on average. Let's say that's the number. Okay, so you've got your ACV, your average ACV, $10,000. Then you multiply that by your pipeline to close one rate. So for any given qualified opportunity, how many of them, if you have 100 of them, how many of them convert to close one? Let's say that's like 23, right? So you've got 10,000 times 0.23. And then we'll take one step back, especially for mid-market and enterprise sales, to look at out of any given meeting, how many of those meetings, first meetings with the customer, become qualified opportunities. On the SMB sales side, if you're selling to SMB, those are likely the same number. You likely just need to do one calculation here. But if you're enterprise, you probably back it up one more to say, actually out of every 10 meetings we do, first meetings with clients, 3 of them are just disqualified. So it's really 70%. So in that case, we're taking 10,000, we're multiplying it by the qualified opt to close 1.23, and then we're multiplying it again by 0.7. And that gives us, for any given meeting that someone on your team does, what is the value of that meeting to the company? So once you have your average value per meeting, you can take that and you can plug that into your lead deficit calculation. And here we're taking your average value per meeting, and we're starting with your overall number of leads per channel. So every month we have 150 leads from webinars. Okay, so if we have 150 leads from webinars, now the number that's the hardest to get, and I would encourage you to work with the revenue ops, marketing ops, sales ops, demand gen leadership to get this number, and sales leadership usually have to be involved as well. How many opportunities come from, in this case, the webinar lead channel, right? And when we ask this, we've asked this many, many times of executives from Fortune 1000 companies, fast growing startups, the first number they know right away. Okay, it's about 150 webinar leads. Okay, great. Now, how many opportunities come from that channel? And then they usually go, that's a good question. But they'll work with somebody and they'll come back with a number. And that number out of 150, like a standard number might be like 46. Sometimes it's like 32. It is a huge drop off. And so we take that delta. In this case, let's do 150 minus 30. 150 minus 30 is 120. Every month, 120 leads from the webinar follow-up channel are not converting. So now we take that 120 number and we multiply it by your average value per meeting. If your average value per meeting is $1,000, let's say it's $10,000, let's say it's $1,000, the number, an average calculation. So we've got 120 times $1,000. Every month we're leaving $120,000 of business on the table from webinar follow-ups. Mm-hmm. And that's that two-step calculation that is exposing just how leaky that part of the funnel is. And it's rare that we do the numbers and people don't go, whoa, okay, I didn't realize it was that big.
Yeah. I love it. And it also goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's just you're a sales leader, listening to this right now, and you can quantify the average value per meeting that each of your rep is holding. And you find out it's, $3,000. Well, you go up, have you done $3,000 worth of prep for this? Like not just 15 minutes, not the quick, 3x3, or have you put $3,000 worth of prep into this meeting? And if you haven't, where are those resources? Like, it's almost like, marketing should be then involved. It's a $3,000 per meeting. Why aren't we getting some help for marketing? Why don't you have an executive on the call? Like, it kind of reframes all these calls that we think are not insignificant, but I don't think people treat them quite as serious as they are.
Scott, you're absolutely right. And one more lens on that is, are you offering your prospect $3,000 worth of value for taking this call with you?
Yeah. That's a great point. Okay, we've got another question here from Michael. His question is, when you talk, because you guys have talked to a lot of people about this issue, how were clients getting visibility into kind of missed ops before? Were they even?
So one thing I would put on that is typically they'll either run a report in Salesforce or HubSpot, and they'll say, okay, lead source webinar, pull up opportunity objects, deal source, was it webinar, that sort of thing. They'll run a report like that to get a sense of, okay, what are we actually getting out? Now this gap, this missed opportunity, that's where we're really approaching this as kind of like the total addressable market, right? If we lived in a perfect world and you could snap your fingers and make sure you got 100% of that delta captured, what's in that delta, that's really giving you the mark, right? And now it's, okay, how do we develop a go-to-market strategy to capture any meaningful percentage of that? And it gives you some insight into what is a meaningful percentage, right? If my quota is 100K a quarter, and I know that just in what's getting funneled to me, there's 120K a month sitting out there, I can guarantee you in any slack time I have, or in the drive home or in traffic, I'm going to be thinking, what can I do with 15 minutes a day? What can I do with half an hour a day to materially increase, the amount of conversion that I'm getting through there?
Mm-hmm. The other thing the thing I would add about just the current state of these numbers is, right now it's very typical for marketing to really focus on generating demand all the way to lead delivery and maybe MQL or SQL. And then they kind of leave it there. And then sales picks it up on, here's the top of my pipeline and here's what I'm closing out of that pipeline. But right where the two meet, that's right where that last mile problem is. And the one trend that we see in the industry, Scott, that is positive here is the revenue titles. Revenue ops, chief revenue officer. Folks really taking a revenue lens, and that's helpful because this last mile problem is not squarely in marketing or sales. It's right where they meet. So I would encourage everyone to consider, if you have sales ops and marketing ops today, consider a revenue ops leader that sits above them, or a revenue ops that is a hybrid role between the two, because today they are increasingly, they need to be connected. But they are, in a lot of companies today, they are really not connected. It's two separate, disjointed organizations and set of numbers, and that creates fights during QBRs.
It certainly does. I would agree. I think it's one of the best changes and trends that we're seeing in SaaS right now is this kind of revenue lens where you're looking at the full funnel. It kind of takes out this whole, age-old battle of sales and marketing alignment, because now you've got someone who's essentially on both teams, which is really cool. All right, now how are we going to address this thing, guys? What's the game plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of ways that companies out there are trying to solve this problem. We've spoken to a lot of really like the Global 1000, but also some of the hypergrowth phase companies here in the US as well. One trend that has kind of arisen just more broadly in the market over the last decade is that first bullet point there, the explosion of BDR and SDR teams. You mentioned a very well-read book in our community. I would be willing to bet that that there was some inspiration drawn as well from a study that the Kellogg School of Management actually put out about 15 years ago at this point. What they did was they looked at a number of different sales organizations, and they got the leadership of about half of them to agree to split the functions of openers and closers. They just said, hey, let's run an experiment. Just split the functions of openers and closers. And what they saw was that in the businesses that split the functions of openers and closers, SDRs, BDRs, and AEs, those businesses on average saw a 17% or greater increase in revenue in that first year of just splitting those two processes. And so you have that kind of information getting out. And what you start to see is where maybe 10 and 100 organizations had a dedicated BDR, SDR function 10 years ago. Right now, we're almost at 100%. If you're in a high functioning, like really fast growing or super well established sales engine, I guarantee you've got an SDR or BDR, helping work your patch, right? The issue with this, and one, that's an important thing for so many reasons, not just on the revenue side, but also for talent acquisition, training, and retention. That's an important thing for so many reasons. But the system itself is still fundamentally limited by the same factor, which is headcount, right? I mean, if the cold hard fact is marketers through digital channels will always be able to produce more leads than the human beings actually have time to go and follow up with. And so you see the advent of lead scoring. Now, lead scoring is helpful, don't get me wrong, but I spent literally years of my career trying to figure out how we could create the right scoring model and make sure that the best leads were handled first and we never touched leads that weren't worth it. And guess what? The kind of dirty truth that I'll tell you is none of those efforts went perfectly well. There were still D leads that you'd call them and the guy was like, yeah, I've got 100K in the budget. I need a PO for X, Y, and Z. And there would be an A lead in there that said, oh, I just attended because I was, bumming around and a guy told me you should attend this webinar, right? I mean, the predictive lead scoring is not nailed yet. Will we get there? I think so. But is it nailed yet? No. And then there are other trends that stem from that. Most recently in the last 5-7 years is the sales tech stack. How do we provide tools and processes around those tools that help us generate more revenue? There are a couple things that are good about that and a couple things that aren't so great about that. One of the things is bullet point number 3 right there. Managing a sales tool is not a revenue generating activity. Just because I go buy a sales tool doesn't mean suddenly I flip the switch and I'm going to generate a lot more revenue.
Entering data is not a revenue generating activity.
And thank goodness, I think most salespeople are happy about that.
Well, I mean, if you look at kind of the state of B2B sales today, don't get me wrong. When they came around, that first wave of seller-facing CRMs, like extremely helpful because it gets you out of spreadsheets, right?
Yeah.
But who is that really helping? The spreadsheet was an effective solution for the seller. The non-spreadsheet version of the CRM is really a operations and BI team aid on data. And what have we found over the last 10 years is that sellers are spending increasingly more of their time that could be spent doing revenue generating activities, entering data into these systems to hopefully help these operations and BI titles, right? Mm-hmm. So whenever we are encountering a new sales leader, or whenever I was in previous roles, the best ones would always ask a question before we deployed the sales tool. Is this just something else my reps have to manage? Is this materially going to give them time back in their day? Quick nod to outreach. The interface that you guys have provided, the what I see as a sales leader and occasional seller myself, what I see in that is focus and it's clarity. This is the most effective way to spend my calories today, and I've got a force multiplier here in my back pocket that I can use to do more activities than otherwise would be possible, with myself alone as a human. But Aaron, you've got some opinions as well on the market and the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I just think very practical here for the folks on the webinar. Honing in on who's in market, which prospects are in market, and being very sacred about the time that you spend with time only with the folks that are in market as much as possible, and that leaves more time to get to everyone and more leads right at that moment when they're in market. And so automation tools that can help you connect faster to them. And when you think about sacred time management, you think a lot about the calendar and making sure that you are orchestrating the calendar in a way that is optimal for the prospect's time and what they're considering and for you as a seller. And at Kronologic, we are a calendar monetization engine. We look at what is the space available, and we actually look at the dollars. We actually quantify the value and revenue potential in a given calendar because that changes faster than any kind of data in our CRM. So that's affected kind of our perspective on it. Spend time with the right prospects and as many of those prospects right when they're ready.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I totally agree. And it seems like you guys have really taken the old, people, process, technology to heart, right? You guys you get the people, then you build the process around what you want this technology to perform, and then you bring it in, and only then if it's going to A, give you back more time in your day, or B, allow you to do more activities faster, which I totally agree with. Okay, we got a spot here. A good question, putting you on the spot a little bit. We got a few in the Q&A and a few in chat. Michael, and you guys can reveal this if you'd like, or it's up to you. What's the sales tech stack currently at Kronologic?
Well, Kronologic is, we are unlikely to be. We're not a large scale sales team at this point. We're a growing sales organization. So our sales tech stack today is pretty basic, to be honest. Now, Kronologic as a platform is integrated with Salesforce. We do a lot with Salesforce. But today, at the moment, we work out of HubSpot, although we plan to work out of Salesforce in the future. And then we have, we do a lot with, meeting recording. So like chorus.ai, we're big fans of. And we'll find those snippets. And something else that we've done that people have been really excited by is we have what we call sizzle reel, Scott. So we as we look at those recordings, we look at different reactions that different prospects have around different elements of what we offer in our presentation, and we put it together much like a television studio would, as a sizzle reel of kind of like our greatest hits. So
cool.
we're big on chorus.ai. We use HubSpot today. We use G Suite. And those are some of the main tools. Obviously, big fans of outreach and spend a lot of time with you guys as well. And we've used some of the most famous sequences out there.
I would also say Zoom, the platform that we're on today. I mean, this is your link, but it's indispensable for us right now. One thing that was totally not culture in past organizations that I was in was doing what we're doing, which is having the webcam on. And I can tell you, when we came and we started this company and our sales team began to grow, it is an absolute mandatory for internal meetings, for external meetings. I don't care if the external personnel have their camera on, but our cameras are on. It humanizes you. Even in this day and age of consultative selling and really trying to be the strategic advisor, there is a huge segment of buyers that still have an aversion to salespeople in general, no matter if you are, the most consultative person who just wants to find the right answer for them. Having that camera on and just that little bit of extra, humanizing element really allows us to connect in ways that you couldn't do or weren't culture really just 5 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah. Huge. And now there's a ton of data to back that up. I know Chorus has released some, Zoom has released some, and deal win rates go quite a bit up. So that's awesome. I love the sizzle reel. Aaron, I got to ask you, was that from the MTV days? You bringing that back, man?
Yes. I started my career in television. I was a casting director at MTV. I worked for Tyra Banks at Warner Brothers Telepictures for a while. And I really do believe sales is an opportunity to highlight some of the best and brightest and just bring as much charisma and also stand out. I had a CEO, Scott, that would, early in my sales career, I remember I was going in to sell to the Pentagon, right? The Pentagon. And I said, what do I need to walk out of there leaving with them? And he goes, you need to be memorable. Mm-hmm. They see a lot of presentations. If there's one word, you need to be memorable.
Yeah, totally. I would 100% agree. You got to be memorable. And then also, I think, I can't remember who said this, but we've kind of moved from this tell me economy to a show me economy. So you don't just talk of hey, our customers love us, blah, blah, blah. Here's some quotes from them that I've memorized. It's if you have those, showcase them. We've got the tools now. So I love that sizzle reel. And anyone listening, I would steal that for sure. That should become a best practice, I think. Awesome. All right. So we have a little bit of time for Q&A if you guys are here. We've got some questions rolling in. Let's do the key takeaways here. Just kind of reiterate them real quick. Ben or Aaron, you want to bang those up?
Yeah, I'll start with the first one. The last mile problem is almost always bigger than you expect. So we did a little bit of math, but if you look at that, your average value per meeting, and then you use that to calculate your lead deficit, what you're leaving on the table by lead channel, and you add that lead channel by lead channel across your organization, consistently companies are saying, wow, all of the sales that I want to achieve and go beyond my company goals are there. Already in my funnel. It's just I've got a leaky funnel. So the last mile problem is bigger than you expect. Take the time to calculate it. And at Chronologic, we've got a team that would be happy to help you with that when it's helpful.
And one thing, I forgot to say it earlier, but we're talking about, okay, once I know that, how does it impact behavior? It can be as rudimentary as this. We literally have a whiteboard in our office, and we have our average value per meeting written on that whiteboard, and in any given day, it's how much quota retirement is the team going to do today. You look at the calendars, you look at the meetings, you understand that they're those kind of first discovery call meetings, and track it, make it visible. It will change behavior, and it will change the value that you yourself as a seller have to bring to a meeting, right? Which will ultimately help close rates.
Absolutely.
And then that second point is timing is everything. kind of going back to that B2C expectation, there was a bullet point down there that I don't think we spoke to, but InsideSales.com put out a bunch of data around a study that they did that showed that 42% of all B2B deals go to the vendor that engages first. Not the vendor that, they saw the most LinkedIn ads from or anything like that. It's once I am in that buying phase and I've self-educated and I've said, I know that I'm buying one of these 3 to 5 solutions. Let me put requests for contact in. Almost half the time, the first person there is the one who wins the deal. So timing is everything. Be first. And then the last piece here is, the tools that you're using and if anybody is on this webinar is in leadership or going into leadership, a sniff test for is this a tool or a process I should adopt is try to quantify to the best of your abilities how much time this is going to give back in my day. Of that 100 calories that I've got to spend, let's just say for the sake of argument, I can only spend 100 calories a day. How many of those is this tool or process going to return to me specifically, not necessarily the data warehouse? Sales and sales tech out there that doesn't automatically, update the appropriate data sources for you. Hey, the design team's got some work left to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've come to that point now where I feel like that has to be table stakes for sure. Is that easy kind of synchronization back and forth of data? Awesome, guys. I agree with all these takeaways. I agree that this is a huge issue. I've seen it, firsthand in many organizations. And I think the way you kind of laid out some solutions is spot on. So definitely check these guys out. These guys are doing some really cool things to actually solve this problem. So if you're at that stage where it's really, really becoming an issue, most definitely get in touch with one of these two gentlemen. And let's have a quick Q&A. There's a few good ones here. First one is from Dan. Dan, thanks for the question. Dan's question is, would you put a dedicated BDR up to these last mile leads? So my understanding is like someone who's just dedicated on when it's leaking out, they catch all the scraps. What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely, I don't think I would use that language to say that, but I will say that there are lead channels that aren't being recognized as lead channels. So, for example, a common we've seen lately with customers of ours, they have leads that they call once, and if they don't get a hold of them, they just go into this marketing kind of bucket that they get a bunch of emails that basically really doesn't produce anything. Should we just give up on those and send them to marketing for a bunch of emails over the next couple of years? Or is there at least a subsegment of those that a BDR could be assigned to reach out to these? You're round 2. You're guy number 2. We don't get them to them first time. We're not going to throw them away. We're going to continue to go after them. Gated content leads as well. Put some filters on that. You can't do 1,000 calls a month, but maybe a BDR can go after at least like tier 1 prospects that have gated interaction with a certain type of content that lets you know that the prospect is really close to a decision phase. Don't just let those slide.
Yeah, I like that. Any further thoughts on that one, Beth?
Well, I would just say that the short answer, would I have a dedicated head to going after those, the parts of the leaky bucket? I'm a nerd. I'd quantify it first, right? Yeah. I would get to the number. But if that number justifies a head count and you can considerably expect, that TAM is 5, 6, 7 times larger than the cost of that head count, absolutely. I think you're going to be able to get significantly more out of those niches if there's someone whose day is focused on that.
Scott, I'll give you an example where I wouldn't recommend it. Consistently, we meet with executives who, when we start going into the numbers, when we go to cross-sell opportunities, the TAM around cross-sell opportunities, existing customers that don't use one of our newer products, is enormous, like $100 million or $50 million. These guys are accessible to you. They're already customers. Sticking a BDR on them is likely to be a problem. But then the other challenge is, okay, do my client success directors really have time and temperament to go kind of do what is kind of a BDR role within their existing accounts? So cross-sells are hard. That's an area at Chronologic we have helped companies with in a big way, and we've seen a lot of client growth within our own accounts, is helping clients get after those cross-sell TAM opportunities without using a BDR and without sucking up time from the client success team.
Yeah. That might have to be another webinar, because I have some strong beliefs that the cross-sell, upsell opportunities that most SaaS companies have would absolutely blow their mind. And I think the future of sales will actually belong to kind of customer success, but it won't be exactly the role that we see it as today. And I think a lot more sellers will go into kind of more account management kind of thing. But that's for another day.
I look forward to that webinar. I think we'll be able to agree with each other loudly for about an hour.
We'll just pat each other on the back. You got it, man. You got it. Awesome. Okay, last question I'll kind of sneak in. And this is just about your kind of process at Chronologic. So do you have a dashboard set up in your CRM, which you said was HubSpot, to kind of quantify each seller's meetings that they have on the books in any given day?
Yeah, so we actually have a calendar interface, and we look at the dollars within every given like month, and then week, and then even day. So Monday, there might be $6,000 worth of meetings in a given sales team's calendar. Tuesday, that number might be 9,000. And Wednesday, it might be 3,000. And we monitor that. And then we can also monitor rep by rep by rep as well. And that gets into, what does the at-bats look like for that rep? Do you close 4 out of every 10 meetings, or do you close 6 out of every 10 meetings? That difference is a big deal. And we put a dollar amount to that for sales leadership.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I can imagine, how helpful that would be for forecasting. I just read some stat the other day on how terrible we are all at forecasting, even though we have all this data more than ever. So that would be another really cool tool to use. Awesome. Well, gentlemen, it's always fun hanging out. Anyone listening, go check these guys out. Very, very cool stuff they're doing. And I'm sure they'll be back in the Sales Hacker community. But yeah, thanks again, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott.
Scott, this was great. Always is. Audience, thank you for your participation, and look forward to talking to y'all again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.